and I was surprised. And then they rose up, and now we've got they had I don't know if you want to call it a coup or a change of government, whatever you want to call it. And now we've got the people who want more freedom and less Muslim Brotherhood. They are represented by the military. This is all gets kind of convoluted, but so you got the military fighting for the people who want more freedom against the Muslim Brotherhood, and it's getting bloody and bad over there in the streets of Cairo and other parts of Israel, and the Christians are being persecuted too by the Muslim Brotherhood. Anyway, make sense of all that for us, Sandy.
Easy question.
Yeah. What do you comment on what you know about what's happening over there and the people you talk to on your show in the morning, so forth?
Well, I think the thing that seems clear to me, Tim, first of all, Mubarak, even though it was a dictatorship, you can call it that kind of brings to mind mistreatment. I think most Egyptians had quite a bit of freedom under Mubarak, except for the Muslim Brotherhood.
That's true.
Muslim Brotherhood were pressed underground like in 1950-something, because every time they come up, they are violent Islamists who cause lots of trouble. They just will not cooperate with whatever governing. That's the way they are around the world. We see this all the time. So Mubarak made sure that they were tapped down. He was corrupt financially. He took a lot of money, took a lot of American aid for himself, but I don't think he mistreated people. And I think most Egyptians.
Right.
And I think that certainly Egyptian Christians were able to worship pretty freely under Mubarak. All right, so our president decided to sort of lend his voice to the so-called fake, ridiculously named Arab Spring, and jumped on the bandwagon to get rid of Mubarak. Just really, it seemed to many of us that wherever the Muslim Brotherhood conspires around the globe, that is the side that our president falls on. Whether that's an accident or not, I don't know. But he was certainly cooperative and happy about Mubarak falling from power. So he did. That left chaos. Muslim Brotherhood came out of the shadows, and they claimed to be a political group. They claimed to want to work peacefully. But honestly, Tim, the Al-Qaeda was birthed from the Muslim Brotherhood. Muslim Brotherhood was founded in 1928 in Egypt. And it's not that they don't believe in violence. It's that they believe in taking power through the political system in a much more cunning way, if that's possible. If that's not working out very well, then they resort to violence. So Al-Qaeda and the Muslim Brotherhood are joined at the hip. So, and I could go on, and I will, if you want me to, but you've got other people to talk.
You said President Fred, what's your take on this?
Well, it's very interesting. I think the current supporters of Mohammed Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood elected leader, it's really interesting to see what's happening there. For the most part, one of the things they're doing is attacking churches. They believe the Christians are actually behind the ouster of Morsi, and that the military is working for the Christians. You talk about confusion. In fact, in one of the mosques in the last few days there, they put over the loudspeaker, it is the Jews and the Christians that are causing all of this problem, and that we have to stop them. And that's why many churches in the last 3 or 4 days have been destroyed. So they're focusing on the Christians and the Jews as being the source of the problem. Now, these are Morsi's people. And so you have this chaos. The Christians just want peace. They want to be able to worship.
And they're about, what, 8 or 10% of the population?
8 or 10, but the Coptic
Egypt?
Christians for the most part we're talking about, but there are some other factions in there. Now, here's the latest that we had this morning. There's a possibility Mubarak may be released. He has been held in captivity over the last 2 years. He may be released because, according to the Egyptian constitution, his time of being held, about 2 years, is up. So what's going to happen when he is released? Is it possible the military may support him?
He's 80-something years old, isn't he?
80-something years old. Now, the debate going on in Congress to keep the aid going. As Sandy mentioned, this so-called coup that has occurred, but in reality, the military is doing the bidding of the larger portion of the population. So there's a debate going on in Congress whether to continue the aid. Now, Congressman Keith Ellison, the first Muslim elected to Congress, says, no, the aid must stop. We must wait until Morsi regains control over there. So
yeah, John McCain says the same thing, Fred.
And John McCain says the same thing.
Why? Who are they for?
Well, they think, or they say at least, that Morsi is the duly democratically elected leader. And what happened with the military was a coup. And that's the operative word they want to use, coup. And according to tradition or otherwise policy, the United States cannot support a government that comes in by means of a coup.
Well, this is tricky, though, Sandy and Fred. I mean, it's because, okay, Americans, we're supposed to be for democracy, okay, and we're supposed to be for against military coups. For example, we're for peaceful transition of power and those kinds of things. So those are principles that we've sort of stood for, but those things don't work here, okay. And the reason they don't work here is because the people that were elected by a slight minority were the Muslim Brotherhood, and they're horrible for American interest and for Israeli peace and for the Christians who live in Egypt. So yes, they were, quote, duly elected, end quote, but the longer they stay in power over there, the worse it's going to get. So, I mean, Sandy, I'm kind of I don't know what to do here. I'm pulling for the military coup.
Well, let me clarify. I think that the confusion is logical, Tim, because President Bush, to my knowledge, as far as I can tell, maybe it went back further, really pushed this whole democracy movement and talked about it was democracy and fully elected governments that we were pursuing, and really kind of limited the definition to that. Remember, our founding fathers were never in favor of democracy. They called it mob rule.
Right.
That was something they tolerated. They thought a mixture of a republic, a representative government with democracy, the people's voice, was the answer, but it was all based on religion and morality. So
a constitutional republic. That's what they were in favor of. Not democracy, but a constitutional republic, which you could argue is a form of democracy in the sense that it is a representative government.
But what I think the deeper issue, it could be argued, America represents is personal freedom. And that, I don't mean by that license, which is how it's also been twisted, but freedom with responsibility. And so we could see that the Muslim Brotherhood was certainly not instituting freedom. They were beginning to persecute Christians. They've been doing this now for the last 2 years. They've been in power. And they were wanting to move Egypt to Sharia law, which is the opposite of freedom. And so when John McCain, to me, I'm just going to use the word disgustingly stated yesterday with Candy Crawley that this was not in keeping with our American values, I just thought this whole business of the definition of values has gotten twisted. I would say this, that since we have a bad law on the books that says if a military coup takes place, we can't give money, to me that's a bad law, but it is the law. We could then say we're not going to give aid, and then we could turn around and pass a law immediately to give them aid under another provision, under another statute. That, I think, is what we, Ted Cruz is even expressing concern about this cavalier treatment of the law, which we have a problem with this administration. Okay, so then let's keep the law and let's pass a new one and help the Egyptian military to really restore freedom to the Egyptian people.
The Egyptian military, though, Fred, normally a military, and this remains to be seen where we're going to go with this in Egypt, we're talking about, and what this means maybe to the Suez Canal and so forth, because that's where a lot of oil comes through, that comes to the West, to Europe, and to the U.S. But I want to ask you this. What does this mean? I understand that the general there, he's the de facto leader of the country in Egypt right now, he's the one, and his guys, the army over there, they're the ones who threw out the Muslim Brotherhood because of popular uprisings. Yes. And I understand they're not even he wasn't even taking calls from Obama or Biden or Secretary Kerry or anything like that.
It is confusing. Normally when there is if you want to call it a military coup, it's always bad.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying earlier.
Yeah. But in this case, the military appears to be standing up for true democracy.
And against the Muslim Brotherhood.
And against the Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
Because the Muslim Brotherhood, I mean, the more we find out about the so-called election that brought them to power, it was very corrupted. So they didn't come in under a legitimate
And they barely
election.
won anyway, even if you bought the legitimacy of the. I mean, it was a deeply divided country.
And the reason, it's not just the military.
Right.
Many citizens in Egypt are supporting the military because they want to get out from this Islamic oppression of Sharia law, of the Muslim Brotherhood. They know it is bad for them. You know, going way back when this so-called Arab Spring began, we talked with Dr. Michael Youssef. He said it would never work. It just won't work in Egypt. And it's you want
His
to call
homeland.
His homeland, yeah. He says the lesser of two evils. Mubarak is the lesser of two evils there. And what got elected was the greater evil. And now you have this combination of the military trying to work with the more moderate groups within Egypt to restore some degree of democracy and get rid of the Islamic oppression. That's what's going on. It is a strange mix. It's not following
And it's very
traditions at all.
fluid too. It's
Every day, like I said this morning, the headline is Mubarak may be released. I know he's old, but what will happen? Will the popular uprising against the Muslim Brotherhood say, bring back Mubarak for a while? At least we had some freedom under him.
Tim, if I could interject something, it's something that people should mark in their minds and remember. There is a movement worldwide among the communists and the left. In the Western Hemisphere, it's called the Sao Paulo Forum. And the whole idea is for the far left to infiltrate the democratic system and then change the Constitution and then take power. Hugo Chavez followed the pattern in Venezuela. We have other dictators in South America that have done the same thing, and they're actually preaching this. And the background, I don't want to go into too much detail to weigh you down, but let me just say that when the Russians lost their influence in the West, Castro and others got together, and this was their plan, to subvert democracy by being elected by the democratic process and then taking power. And so this is what when I talked to a man who had challenged Hugo Chavez for president in Venezuela, he was warning me about what was happening in America in regard to that, to beware. And of course, this is not anything new. We know Hitler took power through the democratic process as well, and then began to establish a dictatorship. And so it's our values don't include, elections for any reason under any circumstance. Whoever, Hamas took over in Palestine through a democratic process, and they're a terrorist group. So we have to be wise about this and discerning.
Amen. Talking to Sandy Rios. You can go to her website, sandyrios.com, R-I-O-S, and Sandy's heard each morning here on AFR Talk from 7:05 Central Time to 8 o'clock. Sandy's talk show is heard here on AFR Talk. Fred Jackson also with me, news director for American Family News and onenewsnow.com, onenewsnow.com. Ray Pritchard is co-hosting with me, but he hadn't been for the last 15 minutes because we've been talking here.
I've been listening in to an excellent discussion.
I want to ask you this part, Ray.
Yeah.
You've traveled in Israel a lot, as have I. Sandy just returned from there recently. Israel borders Egypt to the south. The Israelis are very attentive, obviously, to what's going on in Egypt. I've got to think if you were to ask the average Israeli, they're glad to see the Muslim Brotherhood out of there. But what do you think?
I'm just looking right now at a Reuters article just out in the last probably 45 minutes. It says, concerned Israel quietly backs Egypt's military. And the Israelis, I think, agree entirely with the discussion that we've had to this point, that if you have to pick between the military and the Muslim Brotherhood, at least during the years when Mubarak was in power, there was relative peace and relative stability between Israel and Egypt. And I think the Israelis completely understand that with the Muslim Brotherhood in power in any way whatsoever, they can never feel safe on their southwestern flank. They just can't. They can't trust any Egyptian promises if the Muslim Brotherhood is in power. So we have the odd situation, according to this Reuters article, that is the Israelis and the Saudis, who often do not see eye to eye, that the that those two nations, the Israelis and the Saudis together, are urging the United States not to put pressure on the military, but actually to back them in this battle.
Sandy, the other day, or over the weekend, was it not announced that President Obama has said that we will not join in joint military exercises with the Egyptian army because in protest of their taking over of the government?
Yes, he said that in a Friday news conference from, where his vacation, Martha's Vineyard. He said basically we could not support what the military's doing, that we were appalled and whatever adjectives you put in.